keyboard. I don't know. I guess it's just a mouse. But you do have a keyboard in front of you.
I know, but I never use it.
No. Susan's always doing this. And I never figured out how to do that.
The system does not know. We're trying to keep this one till about midnight tonight.
Like the last one, thanks. And you're gonna be recusing next week too.
Yeah, that's not worried about.
Thanks.
We got 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
Dean will be there. Next week is
No, one of them more, the other item is a code update, so it's a minor amendment to the code. There's a bill that passed, and so now certain types of,
I am show.
I knew it was coming because the meeting was gonna be.
if you have any questions, if you don't, because we're all like, you need to dig into this, folks, make sure we answer questions early.
Yeah, early.
I'm seeing it happen.
Up in the air.
Yeah, well, it's my view tonight. We got her. Stay there, stay there.
Stay there, don't drift. Okay. Won't drift. Stay steady, wait, so I have 6 seconds. Hi, Susan.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
This weather's so bouncy. Hot, cold,
Yeah,
hot.
I got my jacket on tonight, but it was
The
hot
vest is a
today.
good way
Yeah.
at this time.
Do you wanna do ugly Christmas sweaters next week at the meeting?
Oh, good.
Do you wanna do it?
Sure, I'm up for it.
Right? I mean, you'll only be here for like a moment of the
I
meeting,
know.
but,
Yeah, I'm up for it.
right, okay.
I have
let's-
one.
Should we tell everybody next week? Ugly Christmas sweaters. Okay? Bob?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were back. Yeah, we were
Ugly-
just,
Next week, ugly Christmas sweater.
Yeah, everything seems to be working.
Ugly Christmas sweater next week.
ugly Christmas sweaters? Okay, sounds like a plan.
Right?
I can't wait to see Steve's.
Yeah.
Our screens aren't,
I have a,
but
Yeah.
these aren't working yet, huh? These working.
I responded right away. Faster.
I know.
Meetings. Ugly Christmas. Leave my hand right. Ugly Christmas sweater. Ugly Christmas sweater to the meeting next week. Where?
Francis?
Ugly, ugly.
We're going to exchange?
No, wear an ugly Christmas
Oh, you're
sweater.
gonna wear a sweater?
You all are, we all are. Ugly.
Okay.
It's all fun and games.
You know,
Do you have
I
one?
think I have a sweatshirt that
Yeah,
has a
that's
sweater.
That's okay.
And I think it's my son's one I gifted him that he doesn't like.
Meeting's the 18th.
It has
So close
cats
to
on it
Christmas.
because he likes cats.
Mine has a cat too. Mine also has a cat. We're actually gonna do a cat themed, so.
Cat theme.
Mine's cat, mine is
Oh,
cat.
I'm
Susan's
challenged.
has, Susan's has a cat.
Okay.
Ugly Christmas cat sweater. City council does themes sometimes. We can, they do Hawaiian shirts, or they do other things. We can do it too. No? Festive. Is he working on it? Or he's doing it?
last night I woke up at 4 a.m. for some reason. And I think it might, could it be because my iPhone updated? I left it
Oh,
on
maybe.
because it was supposed to update.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe it made noise.
Probably.
I'm like deaf
You're like-
without the hearing aids at night, but I hear a little.
Yeah,
And I think it woke me up.
yeah.
So annoying.
This is your first time in Encinitas?
So my lip balm, thank you.
Just like this is such a sad introduction to the city. Right into the chambers. Okay.
Where is your office?
After 3 years.
So I'm in the Pasadena
No
office.
one, yeah.
Bruce,
And we have a San Diego office and Orange.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do it your way.
Like I was saying, the drive tonight was 2 hours for miles. And normally on the weekend, if I go down, I should see my son in San Diego State. 2.5, 3 hours. Very defined pockets of traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I was 15
Don't jinx yourself.
It's true. Yeah.
We're all knocking on wood for you,
Yeah.
no one is traffic.
Next week, we'll discuss the Christmas spread.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It's just, that's really depressing.
We had our office party last Friday.
Yeah.
20 miles away, so it should have been a half-hour drive.
Yeah.
The freeway was closed at Del Mar.
Yeah.
It took me an hour to get to Solana Beach and another hour to get to Del Mar.
Yeah, I was in that traffic.
Cleared it, and then took another half hour to get down.
It was horrible.
2.5 hours was miserable.
Yeah, I went down to Imperial Beach to one of my old.
Is that what it is? You crashed the mission? Did you crash? Did you crash?
Send off.
You did. Did you
Right,
crash?
well, I was at lunch, right, during the whole day, and then,
It started at midnight.
Yeah.
Which, what big deal is that?
I didn't hear anything. Like, once I was awake, I
I
wasn't
wanted to
hearing
get
anything.
Oh,
I can only think that's why.
This is. Coming back though.
Oh, there's no.
yeah.
We can't, I guess we
You know,
can.
a half hour later, you know.
Well, I got one of these,
Yeah,
so
it's
Horrendous.
yeah,
I think
it
we
was
should
horrendous.
just go
I like backtracked, so I got off at the 56.
Yeah, we can do that.
If I was trying to go around a different way, so I got off at 56, and then got off at, Del Sur. Even that area was super backed up. So my husband was also driving down the road, so we ended up popping off and just going into that. There's like a Blonde's shopping center there. And it was just like, that's better than the traffic. At least we'll be at the grocery store, something like, it was so bad. Like, I think the only comparable traffic from that sort of like shutdown was like,
Me
it was
too.
like, what?
And I've done more work.
12 years ago or
I have
something.
too.
When the power outage happened in like San Diego, and then everything shut down, like that's probably the only equivalent level of traffic that I've experienced.
What other cities do you cover?
So I've got 4 cities up in Siskiyou County.
Wow.
Yeah, so, up and down here.
So this is an easy drive. Is that every week?
No, once a month. They do a lot of bicycling.
Oh, I bet it's because it's a special meeting, that's why it's not come
Oh,
up.
maybe.
They probably had to like
Okay.
add it.
Right.
Hopefully they can arrange those ones on the weekend, you can get a hotel a weekend away.
That would be better.
Tuesday.
Oh my gosh, we were all over the place.
Now they're probably adding us one by one.
When I've got to do the later,
Oh.
Yeah, but it's not quite ready. So you knew our last meeting went till midnight, right? Right up until the end. I had to zoom through like all the last stuff in like 30 seconds.
I was so like, I was home with like my comfy clothes, I just relaxed and reading. I did not watch it live. I watched the video and tape
Later.
so I could fast forward.
Yeah.
Is it loading up on your guys'?
Oh,
Ah, there
yep.
it is. Oh, we're up. Here we go.
You guys are- oh,
Okay.
All right. It came through.
All right, I'll give you my 30-second head start right now.
Now Patty left.
Oh, is Patty required? Patty Anderson? Okay, good evening, everybody. We'd like to welcome you to this special hearing of the Planning Commission. And I guess we'll do roll call first and let the record reflect that all 5 commissioners are present. And with that, we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I guess because we're a special meeting, there is no consent calendar tonight, and so we'll just move right into our regular agenda items, which is item 4A. This is case number policy 006321, 2023. The applicant is the City of Encinitas, and it's a public meeting to consider a recommendation to the City Council for a municipal code amendment for the adoption of the mature tree ordinance. With that, I will look to Evan Jednek for a staff report.
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Evan Jednak, Senior Planner, here tonight to present the Mature Tree Preservation Ordinance. This effort was initiated by the City Council in December 2021, when the Council directed staff to define what qualifies as a mature tree and to establish objective standards for preservation. After working with Council members to determine the project direction, staff provided the City Council with an update on the development of the ordinance in October 2022. Staff conducted a community workshop in March 2023 for the public to learn about and provide feedback on the ordinance development. In June 2023, a joint study session between the Planning Commission and the Urban Forest Advisory Committee, or UFAC, was held, and discussion topics focused on defining a mature tree, mitigation and replacement strategies, and applicability of the ordinance. In August 2024, staff returned to the City Council to reconfirm their direction in consideration of feedback received during outreach efforts. A public review and comment period was conducted from January 30th to February 12th of this year, with interested parties receiving an email and link to the draft ordinance. On February 20th, this Planning Commission reviewed the project and recommended City Council approval with suggested revisions, including one revision that wasn't incorporated into the draft ordinance, and that will be highlighted on a later slide. Since then, on March 27th, a UFAC subcommittee was formed to work on their recommendations, and then on August 28th, the UFAC reached consensus on its recommendations in the form of a revised ordinance. While most of the UFAC suggested revisions have been incorporated into the staff ordinance, there are 3 remaining discrepancies which will be outlined on a later slide. On October 9th, the Environmental Commission reviewed the project and requested a special joint meeting with the UFAC and Environmental Commission. On October 22nd, the City Council held a special meeting on their work plan, and council members requested that the ordinance be brought to City Council for consideration as soon as possible. On November 13th, the Environmental Commission and UFAC provided staff additional comments for consideration, which are attached to the agenda report. While the General Plan Resource Management Element and Climate Action Plan reference mature trees, the term is not currently defined in any document, so defining a mature tree is a necessary first step. The draft ordinance includes a definition shown here. Mature tree would mean any tree with an 11-inch or greater trunk diameter, native tree species with a 9-inch or greater trunk diameter, and native scrub oak species with a 4-inch or greater trunk diameter. The diameter is measured at standard height, 4.5 feet above the base of the tree. Certain trees are proposed to be exempt from the definition regardless of size, which would include city-defined invasive trees, monocot species, and heritage trees, which are subject to separate regulations, such as Planning Commission approval to remove a heritage tree. A key project component was determining which properties are subject to the ordinance. The draft ordinance would apply to all private property, public property, and rights-of-way, except those as specified as exempt on the next slide. A new city tree removal permit would be required to remove a mature tree. The ordinance includes a 2-year look-back period in which mature trees are considered to have been removed and subject to replacement if removed within 2 years prior to submittal of a development application, which would be determined by the city arborist using satellite imagery. Certain properties are proposed to be exempt from the ordinance. Single-family properties on single lots would be exempt, and this would include single-family properties with accessory dwelling units. All orchards, botanical gardens, nurseries, and other professional growing operations would be exempt. Additionally, all property located within a high or very high fire hazard severity zone would also be exempt, which are the areas shown in red and orange on this CAL FIRE map. The ordinance utilizes the mitigation hierarchy shown here for situations when mature trees are proposed to be removed. The primary intent of the ordinance is to preserve mature trees, so the first strategy is always to preserve the tree unless it's infeasible. If preservation is infeasible, the next option is to replace the tree. And replacement scenarios are discussed on the next slide. Finally, if replacing the tree is altogether infeasible, there is an option for the applicant to pay an in lieu fee. The fee would be based on the assessed tree valuation using the appraisal guide approved by the ISA, and the fee would go towards a new city tree preservation and planting fund. In scenarios where replacement is required, a simple 1-to-1 replacement is required if an arborist verifies that the tree is either dead, in severe health, poses a life and safety risk, poses an emergency, or interference with utilities or infrastructure. If none of those criteria can be met, a 3-to-1 ratio is proposed for on-site replacement, which then decreases to 2-to-1 when replacing entirely with natives to incentivize their use. The proposed ratio is 4-to-1 for off-site replacement, which decreases to 3-to-1 when using entirely natives. Replacement trees must also be subject to the ordinance, so no exempt species are allowed as replacements. There is a provision that the city arborist may revise or overturn any determination by a developer's arborist regarding tree health or replacement planting locations, etc. This ensures the city will review such determinations so developers cannot falsely claim a tree is dead or on-site replacement is infeasible, for examples. It is specified that on-site replacement be considered before off-site. If off-site replacement is necessary, the ordinance states that nearby public rights-of-way first be considered, then nearby parks, then other nearby public properties. If no nearby replacement options are available, the next option is to consider public locations further from the subject site. In order to verify that replacement trees survive to maturity, the ordinance requires that 3 years after planting, replacement trees must be evaluated by an arborist. If the tree is determined unlikely to survive, it would then have to be replaced again. Enforcement of the mature tree ordinance would be the responsibility of code enforcement staff in conjunction with the city arborist. Code enforcement would work with the arborist to determine if a mature tree was removed without prior authorization and if the regulations in the ordinance were followed. Violations of the ordinance are subject to treble fees or 3 times the amount of the appraised value of the tree. And to reiterate, enforcement would be limited only to properties subject to the ordinance. Staff incorporated several revisions suggested by the Planning Commission and UFAC since the February Planning Commission meeting. Beyond minor revisions and reorganization, the first major revision was to expand the definition of mature tree to include more native species protected at the smaller 9-inch or 4-inch diameters. Second is the simple 1-to-1 replacement if the tree is diseased or poses a safety risk. Third is the creation of a new city tree removal permit for tracking purposes. And finally, SB 9 properties and fruit trees are no longer exempt. Staff incorporated all of the Planning Commission and UFAC recommendations that did not conflict with City Council direction, public feedback, or state law into the draft ordinance. There are 4 remaining discrepancies between the staff ordinance and the PC UFAC recommendations, which are shown here. First was to keep the provision requiring arborist verification of replacement tree survival after 3 years, which the Planning Commission recommended to remove in February. UFAC discrepancies include the matter of ordinance applicability and the question of whether it should exempt single-family properties as drafted or apply to all properties. Second is the matter of replacement requirements and whether to include the replacement ratios as drafted or allow developers to move to paying an in lieu fee as the next option. Third is regarding high fire hazard severity zones and whether or not to exempt these categories from the ordinance as drafted. In conclusion, staff recommends for the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council for approval and adoption of the Mature Tree Preservation Ordinance. The next steps are introducing the ordinance to City Council, which is tentatively scheduled for January 28th, and then a second City Council reading for potential adoption. This concludes the staff presentation, and we are available for questions.
Thank you, Evan. Can you, as a quick reminder, SB 9 properties, are those, is that the urban lot split or the duplex or the
Yes.
single family?
Yes, that's correct. So those are considered subdivisions. Mhm.
Okay. And we had recommended last time we reviewed it to remove the 3-year evaluation by the arborist. That did not be, that is still in the ordinance as you've drafted it.
That is correct.
Okay. Did that come as direction from council, or was that in conflict with state law?
It was in conflict with mainly the public feedback that we've received throughout the process.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of clarification of the staff? Okay.
Let's see, so the fire maps get updated annually? I know the new fire map, when you posted the fire map up there, is that the current one that just got posted, or is that one from last time?
That's correct. That's the current one that was just adopted this year.
So going forward, if those maps, I'm not sure how often they get adopted or updated. So when the new one comes in, that gets incorporated into the ordinance by right, so to speak?
Well, yeah, the ordinance exempts the very high fire hazard severity zones as identified by CAL FIRE.
So I'm saying if the CAL FIRE map changes, then the next
Yeah.
street over now qualifies, is now exempt, that's all. I'm just saying that
Yes,
gets updated
that's correct.
by default. Okay. And I missed it, and if you just pointed out, where in either the ordinance or the staff report does it say if we're just going to replace a tree 3-to-1, the size of the tree that you're replacing it with? Because we're talking about mature trees by definition, the size of what tree are you replacing with? A stick, 5-gallon, 50-gallon? Where's the definition of that?
It defaults to the UFMP Manual of Procedures, which is the Urban Forest Management Program Administrative Manual of Procedures, and that specifies 15-gallon for replacements as a minimum size.
Wow, okay, kind of small, especially, okay. And define an appraised value of the tree.
So an arborist would have to use the appraisal guide approved by the ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture.
Right.
They would go through a process to use that guide in order to come up with an appraisal value.
So if I have to replace a tree, or someone has to replace a tree, and then the tree costs $100, but it costs $25 to get the tree to the site and another $50 to put the tree in to the site, is that defined as the appraised value, or is it just the tree? Because I want to then treble that cost. So someone is going to be burdened by just the cost of the tree or the cost to replace the tree, which means getting the tree there, digging a hole with a backhoe, and then planting the tree. So if we're talking about trebling the cost or the fees for violation to replace a tree that somehow was violated and cut down prematurely, are we going to bill the treble fees with the total cost of replacing the tree, or just the $100 for the actual tree purchase at Home Depot?
The treble fee would be specifically for the appraisal value. It would not include those other
But you need to put a
costs.
tree The true value is putting the tree
But Bob,
back in the ground.
Let's not go into deliberation. I think
Okay,
you
that's
can bring
deliberation.
up with
All right,
us if you
so-
don't think it's enough.
All right, understood.
Yeah, it just wouldn't be treble.
In your staff report on page 4 of 5, the following trees shall not be classified as mature trees regardless of size. So I guess my question here is, if a large eucalyptus tree with a large trunk that's not on that's a weed or whatever it is under the San Diego County Weed Management Area Watch List, right? So a eucalyptus tree does not have to be replaced if it's removed?
Yeah, that's correct,
Okay.
if it's on that list.
Yep. Good. So under page 5, the first bullet at the bottom under ordinance acceptability, existing single-family properties inclusive of new construction or reconstruction of a single-family residence. So I'm going to bring up just the example in my head was the Melba project that had significant mature trees on it. I understand that this is probably not going to be affected because that project's already been approved, but going forward, that's a single-family home development. Does that qualify as an exemption under that sentence because it's inclusive of new construction or reconstruction of a single-family residence?
No,
Singular, or is that plural for the developments of the new projects that are coming before us?
If you're proposing to change a single-family property to multifamily of any number of units, it would then therefore be covered by the ordinance. So the Melba would be covered in that case, certainly.
But that's not I think of a multifamily project as an apartment building. This is single-family residences on separate subdivisions, so that's a single-family residence, and there's 28 of single-family residences, not a multifamily for-rent well, I think that's a for-sale product. So just want to make sure that I understand a project like that and how they would treat the mature trees.
Yeah, the fact that that project includes a subdivision, which is a subdivision map process, that would then include it.
So they are not exempt, and they would have to, if they were to take down a native tree, I guess they could take down a eucalyptus tree, right?
Yeah.
Because that's non-native.
Correct.
But could they take down a Torrey pine on that site?
They would then have to follow the provisions in the ordinance.
Right, and Bob, if I could interrupt real quick. So I read this section the same way you did, reading it to say that it excludes subdivisions, but it does not exclude subdivisions. So when I had my briefing, I suggested that maybe the language should be changed to make it clear that subdivisions are not excluded.
That'd be
'Cause
great.
I read it the same way you did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I read that too.
If I could just jump into it and ask, so once the subdivision is individually sold off the lots, is it then okay for a owner of a single lot to remove a mature tree?
If it had replacement trees, then those trees will have to be verified 3 years for survival, as currently drafted. But no, I mean, once the property changes hands and it's now owned by a new owner, it is then a single-family property, and so in the future, it would not have protection under the ordinance.
That'd be after the 3 years and 30 days.
Correct.
Okay, so since we're talking about that, what is going to be the mechanism for contacting people to make sure that that's done? You know, now the houses have been, I have a couple questions related to the subdivision. And one is, you know, the houses have been sold, and now we're coming upon the 3-year date. What's the mechanism going to be to contact these now 28 individual homeowners, 48 individual homeowners, to ensure that they are having the checkup of the trees?
Yeah, we don't have a formal process flushed out just yet, but we did discuss, you know, mailers would be sent out to the new property owners, you know, well in advance of their deadline coming up, notifying them that they have to, you know, maintain the tree and schedule for an arborist to come out and verify its survival.
So the fact that they have this responsibility to keep that tree alive for at least 3 years and keep it in place for 3 years would be something that would be like in the deed of trust when the property is being sold to them by the developer?
Yes, that's our understanding.
Okay. And Also related to that, the 3 years after planting. So I just want to make sure I'm reading that, that's correct. It's 3 years after the planting of the tree, not necessarily the 3 years after the project is deemed, like final permits are issued on the property. But so like a tree could be planted, it might take 2 years to do a subdivision, right? Like I live by the Costa 48, and so they've already started putting in some shrubbery. No, I don't think any real trees that are going to count. Maybe they will, I don't know. Maybe or maybe not, some kind of already look dead. But those have already been planted, but it's very new construction still. They're still in the process of just framing these houses, so it's going to take, I don't know how long until that entire project is done. So it's 3 years from the planting for each individual tree. So let's say they've already planted those along La Costa Avenue, and now like in 6 months, a year, when they're finishing the properties in the back, and all that time in between, they're planting different trees maybe, right? Because that project, I think, is a 2-phase project where they're going to do one part and then the other. So what's the mechanism for keeping track of when each tree is planted? So each, we're going to have all these different 3-year periods for each tree if they're planted at different times.
Yeah, it'll be tied to the new permit process that we're creating. So the tree removal permit, if it's in conjunction with a project, will be part of, the building permits and whatnot. And so the tree removal permit portion of that will memorialize and track, all those plantings. And that's why we brought that tree removal permit process into the ordinance. We felt it was absolutely necessary to have something to track, every step of the way, every tree, yeah.
Okay. One more question while I have the mic. So another question I had has to do with which projects this would affect moving forward. I know we talked about this in my briefing. So any project that's already deemed complete when this ordinance goes into effect will not be affected, and any projects that are still somewhere in the permitting process or it's still in planning will be affected?
What we discussed was that any project that has been submitted in for, planning review would not be subject to the ordinance if it was submitted before 30 days after city council adoption when it goes into effect.
Okay, so any submitted after that would be affected?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just saying the definition of deemed complete, right? So
Or submitted. He's saying submitted, which is
submitted, even
different.
though it's
Yeah,
not-
we're saying submitted instead of deemed complete.
Okay, all right. Another example would have been, so the next question as we stay on this topic, the Greek church site on Manchester took down a significant Torrey pine, and stumps are still I can still drive by the stumps every day. Now, that's a multifamily development.
Yes.
I'm talking about going forward. Clearly, that's already happened. You can't do it. But there is a look-back provision I want to ask about. So going forward, a multi-story apartment complex is going to be under the code, just for clarification, a commercial project and therefore subject to the mature tree ordinance, correct?
Yes.
So if someone were to submit a project for an apartment development and there's a big Torrey pine in the middle of it, it would be subject to the mature tree ordinance.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay? Thank you. Well, since I brought up the look back, I think there was a provision in the document that talks about a 2-year look back, right?
That's correct.
But all the projects that have been submitted will not have that 2-year look back, correct? Only projects that are being submitted now will
Yeah,
have a 2-year
that's
look
correct.
back on its site.
Yeah, after it's adopted.
Okay. Susan.
Yes, I have a couple questions related to what they were just discussing. So I think that if the language isn't in CC&Rs for condos or leases for rentals, or possibly a deed restriction for sale, or even in listings of these properties, it's probably going to be hard to communicate and educate the consumer who buys that property or rents that property of their responsibility So I think, I'm not sure if this is included in the ordinance, in CCNR, in leasing, in deed restriction, and in listings. But I think it should be as a point of educating the consumers and making them aware that the property that they're interested in has this restriction. I also didn't see anything about, is there a provision for, let's say, relocating a tree?
No, that was considered at an earlier time, but based on arborist input and UFAC input, relocation was found to be quite simply infeasible, and it was therefore removed as an option.
Okay, and then I would like a cost example, for example, just for one, maybe 11-inch Torrey pine. What would that cost in terms of the in lieu fee?
The general 11-inch Torrey pine is roughly anywhere from like $2,000 to $3,000 for the in lieu fee.
2,000 to 3,000?
Yeah,
And what if
roughly.
it were something smaller, such as a scrub oak?
The oak, just for an appraisal value, that like the Quercus dumosa, the oak, the Encinitas oak, essentially is pretty hard to evaluate, just because the nursery stock is really low, and that plays into how trees are evaluated. So that specific species is really hard to appraise. But as I went through it today, again, this is general. If you wanted like a specific appraisal, it would have to be like formally done. But a general cost on that would be about $4,000 to $5,000 for a mature.
Okay, so again, I understand because sighting is going to vary widely, and the tree itself might be very different one to another, even of the same species. I mean, it could have a different constraint around the roots or something about the site. You know, there could be retaining near it or whatever. So you can't necessarily give us really exact figures. I still think, and I remember Christine brought this up, Commissioner Ryan brought this up, that exempting single family doesn't seem fair to developers, because I understand that about half of the property we have is single-family residence. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander kind of thing. And my thinking is, why would we not want to give the homeowner that opportunity to contribute with an in lieu fee? Was there a reason?
That's a deliberation. That's a discussion.
more of a
That's a
deliberation.
discussion for
Okay.
the five of us. to
Okay,
have.
I'm done with questions then.
Thank you, Susan.
I have a couple more.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
No, go for it.
So when you're talking about the replacement trees and replacing, the reduction and replacing with native species, it has to be replacing of all of them with native species, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And we can add the word entirely into the ordinance to clarify that.
Thank you. We talked about that in my briefing, how it was a little bit, maybe a little bit unclear and could be, a developer could try to read it a different way. And I had another question. We also talked about this, the emergency situation. And maybe we talked about maybe changing the language, because the way it reads on page 19, paragraph, section 4, makes it sound like if there's an emergency, they still need to get the documentation submitted by an ISI certified arborist to review, and approval of the city, basically, in the case of an emergency and a tree needs to be taken out, which would seem like impossible to do in a situation of a real emergency. So maybe we can discuss when we deliberate about that, but I don't know if you guys have had a chance to think on that since we had our briefing.
Yeah, we discussed it. We think adding, like within 30 days of the emergency tree removal would be appropriate, something along those lines. It doesn't have to be 30 days, but.
Okay, thank you.
I got a couple more, just pretty simple ones. On page 6 of the staff report, under the title of header of preservation, third sentence, it says consistent with the general plan resource policy 3.1, it goes down a little bit further, and it says, while the draft ordinance includes several provisions which require that a determination be made by a certified arborist, it includes language to allow the city arborist or the Director of Development Services to reserve the right to review, revise, and overrule. What skill sets does the Director of Development Services have to override the tree ordinance? We're talking about, certified arborists, we're talking about people with skill sets to identify a tree. Why is there a loophole, or why is there an exemption to allow somebody who might not have those skills to be involved?
The director would always be relying on the expertise of the city arborist in those cases.
It says in the statement, it includes the language to allow the city arborist or Director of Development Services. It doesn't say the Director of Development Services has to rely on the arborist. It just says, or the Director of Development Services. So he or she could just say, I'm going to vote in and I'm going to rule accordingly. Based on that sentence, how do you see that sentence, and does that reflected in the ordinance itself?
Hi. So we often have in our ordinances to allow the director of the department to weigh in. But again, they would have to make decisions that are consistent with the intent of the ordinance. So they couldn't just say, I want to do this. Because I don't like the species. I mean, they have
Right.
to make decisions. It's just to allow us, if there's any nuance or, we try to write these as comprehensively as we can, but as much as we try, there's always situations and nuances that arise. So we have this in there specifically to allow the director to make an interpretation based on the intent of the ordinance. And as Evan said, they'll always rely on the experts because we aren't those experts. But sometimes it's more of a procedural interpretation as well. So we wouldn't want to remove that.
In consultation with a certified arborist, the Director of Development Services can make an opinion. But I see it as summarily he or she can make the decision, and that's how I read it. So I understand that's not the intent, but we're drafting an ordinance that becomes law, and we have a clause in there that says somebody can override without being clear.
Bob, why don't we see if there's consensus around that when we get to that?
Get to that?
Could you
All right.
tell me what page or what?
Yes, page 6 of the staff report,
Okay.
under the header preservation, and it's the second to last sentence before the header of mitigation strategies. So it's
And
starts
you know
with
what? Where it appears in the actual ordinance is under section F6, which is on page 17 of the staff report.
Okay. Page 17, I'm reading.
Thank you.
F6.
All right.
Can I ask you a question about the look-back period? Can you bring back up that slide? Okay, so what you're saying is someone owns the land that's going to be developed. They haven't submitted their proposal. They haven't submitted anything to the city yet, but they own the land. And they go in and they remove the mature trees prior to submission in an effort to not have to be subject to the mature tree ordinance. So this 2-year look back allows you to say, hey, wait a minute. We know that within the last 2 years, you took out trees prior to submitting this plan. Is that
That's
correct?
exactly correct,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Almost. I think I was on exemptions, page 14 of 26. It's a staff report that I pulled off the agenda, so I'm not sure if my pages are off. Under applicability, I guess it's C is applicability number, and letter D is exemptions. This is item 414 of 26 of the staff report that was published.
So that's where we discussed adding the words on a single lot after existing single-family properties. So it'd be existing single-family properties on a single lot, comma, inclusive of new construction.
Okay. I just want to make sure, I was just thinking as this applied towards townhome projects. So the Piraeus project, and so would have been the Fox Point Farms project.
Yeah.
Are those, we go back to, again, probably, there are developments, there are single-family residences in a townhome structure. I don't think there's a tree on the Piraeus site, but there could be. And unlike, say, Melba, which might have a tree on the subdivided lot, now we're talking about a townhome-style lot with, zero lot line. They're all touching. I'll just take Fox Point Farms as an example. I think Piraeus is going to be something similar. It's the macro project that, or if there's tree was on the site, how do you assign that to one of the units? If there's a tree that needs to be removed or asked to be removed, how do you apply that tree to unit number 12 or unit number 15 in a 150 size project?
Well, it would have been during the development application to build those townhomes, during that process is when the tree would have been identified as needing to be replaced.
Okay. So it doesn't fall back to the individual unit owner, the developer on a macro level before they get started is going to deal with that.
Correct. Not if we're talking about, townhomes or condominiums.
Okay. Again, a little bit different product type than the Melba single family or the La Costa 48, which are individual lots. Now we're talking about 150 units or 143 in that case on
Yeah.
but also subdivided. So it would be subject to the ordinance.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, because it's a little bit different or interesting when it's condos or townhouses that are for sale, and which owner is going to be responsible for replacing a tree in 3 years if it's dead.
I think we're getting to deliberation, but there's usually a homeowners association that would then be tasked with maintaining trees after the developer has left the picture.
So are we
In your scenario, there are no individual lots before a development application is made, in which case all your townhomes are
Right.
triggered or governed by this ordinance.
Right, so the entire site would be dealt with.
Yeah, after
Okay.
the fact, the developer he'll have placed trees wherever he can fit them,
Right.
and then whoever buys that property, that's part of our discussion, I think, is how this 3-year certification happens. But
Yeah, I was just trying to make sure that I understood that a townhome project was not exempt, is
not.
inclusive of this obligation.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. Any others? Okay, I know we have some people here from the UFAC, and appreciate you guys being here tonight and patiently waiting. We can open up to you.
I'll let them introduce themselves.
Pardon?
I said I'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay, yeah.
Hello, Planning Commission. Brad Lefkowitz, Chair UFAC. So happy to be here. I love where you guys are going with this. It's very fun to watch someone else have to deal with this. So I just want to hit a couple things really quick and on a couple of points I think are worth revisiting. And I'll go quick because 3 minutes goes by fast. For fire, there is an exemption in there for trees that pose a extreme safety risk. And I think jumping to the example of the Preserve project, where we went out of our way to specifically create a classification for Quercus domosa, the little oak for which our city is named, there's, pardon?
Can I interrupt real quick? I just have a point of order. Since it's a joint meeting with planning and UFAC, does he have a 3-minute
It's not a
requirement?
joint
It's not a joint meeting.
Oh, it's not? Okay, I misunderstood.
But we could give some extra time. There's, okay.
Yeah, can I get a time donation from one of y'all? I thought there'd be some people here. So if you think about the Quercus domosa at the Preserve project, we went out of our way to create a special classification for that. You cannot argue that it is a fire hazard by any stretch of the imagination. It's an ecologically significant plant, but if we include this high fire zone exemption, now we're saying that they can remove that plant without penalty. So again, the fire department has requested this. I don't think we're going to really get past it. And I've said a lot on the record already about the value of certain mature trees in high fire zones, but I just wanted to highlight that example. On the question of replacement, I still feel pretty strongly that if we're not able to find a replacement on site, that we should then immediately jump to in lieu fees. Council, this is one of the few specific asks we've got from council, is they want this replacement process to be onerous to the developer. But as soon as we're moving off-site, now it's onerous on the city. The city is the one that has to find a place to plant these trees, and we're not asking the developers to select the trees or plant the trees. I think it's a fair argument that it's actually more onerous on the developer if we are moving off-site to then just ask for these in lieu fees, which could be more expensive and more money than finding replacement trees and planting them. So again, I think it's cleaner if we can't find replacement on site to immediately move to in lieu fees rather than look for places off site. And then speaking of the fees, Commissioner Sherrod was kind of touching on this. I had suggested, as written, it kind of leaves it to the public's imagination how much the penalty might be. I suggested maybe a minimum and maximum fees, or so people have an idea. That was, I guess, not really plausible because of inflation, basically. But I do think it's really important to have some example fees in there, and maybe even those would have to be updated as time goes by, because otherwise, I think the concern is someone's reading this down and be like, oh, that Torrey Pine's worth 6 figures, so I better cut it down before this ordinance goes through, or something like that, where we're just leaving it to the imagination of the public. And it's not an easy thing to really put a number on because there are so many variables, but I think we need to explore some way to add some clarity to that rather than just leaving it to the public's imagination. That's all I have for now. I'm excited that Linda is here. She's really the one that did a lot of the heavy lifting here and is an encyclopedia on this, so I'll let her come up next.
Thank you very much. And you kept it under 3 minutes.
I'll try to do the same. It's very nice to be here before the commission. Like Brad said, it's really great to see you guys talking about it and the different perspectives you have on it. Since we've spent quite a bit of time on it, it's really great to see you dig into it as well. This came to UFAC, and we created a subcommittee, and I headed up the subcommittee. So we spent 5 meetings consecutively on the ordinance, and we created basically a new ordinance or a revised ordinance from what the city staff had given us. So we departed in a couple of different ways from what we have currently before you. And the city staff has done a fabulous job on all the work they've done on it. But there's a few things that didn't quite make it into the report, so I just wanted to bring them to your attention. So first off, I did a lot of research on mature tree ordinances throughout California, trying to see what other communities had done. And I believe I'm correct in stating that this will be the first mature tree ordinance in the state of California. So many communities have tree ordinances for protection of trees, but they are species specific, such as protection of oaks or Torrey pines or sycamores or whatever. But this will be, to my knowledge, the first time mature trees of whatever species, unless excluded, will be subject to the ordinance. So that's one thing to be aware of. The second is that in the various ordinances that I studied, that I found throughout the state, the ones that involved specific tree species, when private property was included, there was never any exemption for residential. So it was either all private property or no private property. So this, if it goes through the way it is currently with an exemption for single-family residences, that again will be a first in the state of California. So there's a couple of other things I wanted to speak about with regard to particularized provisions. One is applicability and exemptions and dealing with that single-family residence exclusion. Another is the subdivision K, which is requiring a tree removal permit when, even when it's not development related. I see I'm down to 20 seconds, so I guess I'm going to have to
We'll
choose.
let you go further.
Okay, thank you. I'm racing as fast as I can.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So on applicability and exemptions, the way UFAC addressed it is we went broad, in other words, covering all property in the city, whether it be public or private. And then from there we went narrow and said, but only if it's development related. So if a single-family residence property owner was not going to build anything or do anything on their property, they had the right to do whatever they wanted with their trees, just as they do today. But if they were going to, build onto their home or add an ADU or do any kind of, development, then they would be subject to the ordinance. So that's the way we addressed it. And then we also had a 2-year look-back period, so to speak, in that if development was going to occur on a property within 2 years, then you had to get a tree removal permit. So you had the 2 years before the development actually occurred, you would have to get a permit for removal of the tree. But again, if you did not have any development planned or intended, then you weren't subject to the ordinance. So we did it that way. Now, public comment on this issue of I call it SFR, you probably do too, was that single-family residence owners didn't want to be subject to the ordinance. Understandable. Would you want to be subject to a new ordinance if you didn't have to be? I think pretty much anybody would say I'd rather be free than be, regulated. But when asked about the commercial property owners, did they want to be regulated? Guess what? They didn't either. So, yes, private property owner, or rather single-family residential owners did not want to be regulated by the ordinance. Neither did the commercial people. That's not surprising, right? So I don't think you can give too much credence to that in terms of a decision-making one way or the other. People see it differently, and that ultimately I think is to be decided by City Council, perhaps you guys too. But I've given you some background on that. The other thing about it too, though, if you want to hear further, is a constitutionality issue. I'm a retired attorney. I worked for the state of California for many years. I dealt with legislation, and I know a little bit about it. So the purpose section of an ordinance, this one is subdivision A. The purpose tells you what the ordinance is trying to achieve. And in this case, we have two purposes written. One is to preserve mature trees located on public and private property and to establish standards for replacement of mature trees if removal occurs. And the second is to establish a tree removal permit process and penalties for the unpermitted removal of mature trees. There's nothing in those purposes that talks about development or about single-family versus commercial property. So it's not holding together. And that it's a constitutional issue, because if the ordinance language does not follow what the purpose is, that's an argument against it being constitutional. So that's a problem. And then with the single-family property versus commercial property, you have an equal protection argument. So you just want to create an ordinance that's as strong as possible, considering that you're doing something that's first in the state. So it can be fixed by, if you decide, well, it should exclude all single-family residential, or whatever the wording is going to be. You can fix that by augmenting the purpose section to say why. Why are single-family being thrown out as opposed to just the commercial? So that's something we did in our ordinance. we put in language to say why we're really targeting development, because development was the problem we were trying to solve. You get these, developers coming in, scrape off all the trees, scrape off the lots, and then develop. That's the problem I think we were trying to solve with the ordinance. So if you put that into the purpose section, like we had with ours, then it hangs together. The purpose follow, the restrictions, regulations follow the purpose. Okay, do you want to hear more?
Well, I'd like you to find a conclusion.
Okay, great. The next one, I'll just say this briefly. Subdivision K is not development related. It's, the permit process. All commercial property owners are now going to have to get a permit every time they remove a mature tree, not development related. I just don't know why that is, and again, it doesn't fit together with the purpose. There you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you both for all the work you have put in to get this far. It's been several years, I know, and a lot of effort, so thank you for all that. With that, I'm going to close the public comment portion and open it up to, or do you have any questions of the UFAC?
No, I really appreciate that you came and spoke to us, and I really appreciate the background information. And I want to speak to what she was just talking about in terms of the purpose of the ordinance.
Okay. Is this a question for her, or is this what, I'm about to close the public comment if we're going to do that? Okay. All right, so closing the public comment and opening it up to commissioner deliberation. Susan, please.
Okay. Regarding the purpose, for me, when I hear a mature tree ordinance, my first thought is it protects the trees that are mature, because mature trees sequester far more carbon than young trees, and it's proven scientifically. They also filter more water because their root system is highly developed, more complex. They provide more habitat because they're larger. So there are numerous benefits, not just for wildlife, but for us as a community, as a whole, as the whole community, we're benefiting. We're having less flooding. We're having better air quality. We're having more bees for pollinating our different kinds of things we grow. And I think that purpose is broad enough that it should include single-family residents. I really doubt that very many single-family residence properties, whether they are developing or not developing, I doubt very many would remove a mature tree because it's quite expensive to do it. So unless it's a hazard, I don't see them doing it. But I think that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think that for the public benefit, just in case you get someone who, just kind of, man, I don't like raking up leaves, and they cut down a mature tree. I don't think we want to see that happen either. Even if they're not developing, they decide, it's making too much shade or whatever. And so I do think they should have to come and get a permit. And I think that mature trees are different than a small, young tree because the benefits are so much greater for the whole community. It's not just for that one property, the benefit of that mature tree. And so I really think the exemption should be removed, and that would be my recommendation. I also feel the fee, the in lieu fee, although $2,000 to $3,000 for an 11-inch Torrey pine that we were given as an example isn't a very significant deterrent to a developer. Sorry, but when they're making millions, 2,000 or 3,000 is not a big blip on their radar. I think that the fee should be a lot higher if you want to take out a mature tree. I don't think if you don't make that fee higher,
What would your
there's
suggestion be?
very little disincentive.
What would you suggest as a higher fee?
I think that we would want to go to the Forest Advisory Committee to ask them, but I would say double at least, but probably a lot more.
Okay.
Probably more like oh, something significant, 20,000, something really that hits them a little bit in the pocketbook to make them think, gee, I wonder if I could design around that and make my design and my site layout a little bit improved so that I can keep that tree, I think it's just
And with
$2,000 or
that,
$3,000 to a developer it's chicken feed.
it is triple that, right? So they would have a value of $3,000. The fee to the developer would be $9,000.
Yeah, I think this idea of maximum and minimum is a good idea.
Okay.
That there should be some minimum amount, 10,000 a minimum or something, I don't know what it is exactly.
And would your opinion hold true if this was being applied to a single-family house? Not a developer?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Because the problem with public perception, I'm an architect, I hold 2 master's degrees, I've been doing environmental work for years, decades. So I read up on it, right? I've educated myself about what are the benefits of a mature tree. So I know. But the average person who is juggling a full-time job, maybe raising a family, maybe pets, whatever, they're just trying to keep up with every day, let's get the food on the table for dinner because the kids are hungry. I don't think that they're drilling down into all of the detail that we are.
Okay. Okay. Brent, do you want to put your initial thoughts out there?
So I thought the staff did a very good job incorporating all of the various avenues of information that was coming in, including the public comment. Although I will admit, I don't know if it's helpful at all, but I will admit I was a little confused by the proposal or the purpose of the objective here to preserve the mature trees around public and private land, and then in stating that in the purpose that all private property was included, and then the first thing they excluded was private property. So I was a little bit confused by that. However, I think the justification of that is sort of well presented and documented in other locations. It's just not really part of the ordinance. Some of the justification for that is wildfire protection that are being required of property owners by insurers these days. And so it just becomes a very difficult position to force people to keep mature trees when they have other financial pressures, asking them to cut back and remove them. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Okay. Bob?
I wrestle. You have a very good point, Steve, when you said, well, would you feel the same way about a private versus commercial? And I wrestle with that based on the public's comment also. And I guess the difference to me is the way I feel about it and I justify it is that the commercial developer is really, generally speaking, into it for profit, while a private property owner might make money on their house, but it's not really looking at the house as a commercial venture and a profit motivation. But it is definitely, if you're looking at a commercial versus a private, if you apply the same cost to both, or you kind of have to be fair if you're going to do it to both sides. I would support increasing, since right now it is exempt to private property, I would actually support increasing it from 3 to 5. I think there's some comments in the back towards the end of the staff report from the joint session of Environmental Commission and UFAC meeting, going from 3 to 5%, but I'd also like to define the true cost, so it's not just the tree. So
I'm sorry, when you say 3 to 5%, you're saying the
3 to 5 times the cost to remove the
instead
tree.
of treble.
I'm going to quadruple. I'm going to
quadruple,
5,
yeah,
5 times. But I also, the definition of 5 also goes to the definition of the cost, and the cost isn't just of the tree. So again, going back to my example, if the tree's $100 and the transportation is $25 and planting's $25, the real cost to replace the tree is $150. It's 5 times $150, not 5 times the cost of the tree itself, because we have to consider the tree being planted. And if the intent is to caution or to disincentivize the knocking down of the tree, we have to make it somewhat punitive. And I think the true cost
In your
is just the
scenario,
tree.
though, in your scenario, the cost to plant it, to truck it, is,
Yes.
is borne by the applicant or the person.
That's right. The one who wants to knock down the tree.
So they're going to have that cost no matter what we do. I feel like if we're going
Yes.
to talk about setting the fee,
Well, why not just the tree? I mean, to me, it's the tree is the replacement of the tree, and you have to
well,
plant it.
it's an arbitrary measure that the city can at least go try to calculate, right? How do we determine the cost to truck the tree and to plant the tree?
All right, then
And
add 20% for additional fees of take $100 times 20%, and that should cover
No,
additional
I
cost.
think you're on the right, I mean.
Yeah,
if this
I
is-
get it. If you're looking for a fixed dollar amount and you say,
No, just,
Bob can
you
truck
said
it for
times 5, right? Or times 6, times 8, whatever you decide is going to cover, make it punitive, just
Right.
make it a simple,
that makes sense.
a simple formula.
Sure.
It sounds like it's not simple at all to determine the value of the tree, but once
No.
you do, have a simple, it's times 2, it's times 3, it's times 4, whatever you
Okay,
decide.
I get it. Rather than add the 20% for the transportation cost, it's one multiplier,
Yeah.
not
They're going to go pay the transportation costs themselves, so that whatever fee they're paying to the city,
Right, it's
they
done.
have an additional burden
All right.
on themselves.
that's fair.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in on the single-family residence versus developer or business, because a single-family residence is completely excluded, even if they are developing their own property, right? So they decide they're going to put in an ADU, they're going to do a big remodel, they're completely exempt. But then you have a developer who is not exempt, but then you also have someone who isn't developing, but they're not exempt, like let's say a business, like let's say it's someone who owns a small commercial property, with 8 to 10 tenants, and it's not a developer, it's not somebody even with a lot of money, but they hold this property and they manage it and they rent out either the units, the apartment units, or the business units. They are subject to this even if they're not doing any development, right?
Correct.
So I have a problem with that. I don't know if we want to talk about that, and that goes to K, which Linda mentioned. I don't think that just doesn't sit well with me that they are subject to this, but single-family residences aren't subject to this, even when the single-family residences are doing development. The property owner that owns the business, who's not exempt, might not be doing anything but having a tree that they want to do something with, and now they have this burden. When a single-family residence, they're going to put on a 2,000 square foot addition. They're going to put in an ADU and a junior ADU, and they're exempt.
Well, you also say, well, on Monday, I'm going to knock down the tree because I'm exempt, and then on Tuesday, I'm going to file for my permit, So you kind of eliminate the ability for them to be governed by the ordinance because they knocked their tree down on Monday and
They
they
have the
submitted.
2-year look back, though, right?
But if
2 years and a
it doesn't
day.
matter because
Yeah.
it's a single-family residence and they can knock their tree down.
Right. Yeah.
So you're right. The way it's written is that the commercial non-single-family residence will be encumbered by the ordinance.
Right. And that isn't necessarily the wealthy developer. That could be anybody who owns a non-exempt,
True, but if-
non-exempt property.
Yes, but at least by identifying the 5 times or 8 times or 10 times cost, there's a quantifiable number that can be used in their calculation of whether they want to do the development or not. I mean, at
But then
least.
I'm talking about people who aren't doing any development. In K, it's removal not related to development.
Can you bring up K? I pulled up the staff report and I read the ordinance and I didn't see K. Please.
But K, as it is now, applies only to commercial and
Right, but.
public property.
Right, but a commercial property, like I said, could be, to other people's point about a person who is burdened as a single-family resident owner, a
Yeah,
person who owns
I
a
see.
commercial property can also be similarly burdened. It just happens to be a commercial property.
But don't forget, we also have a lot of people in Encinitas that have Airbnbs, and they might just take out that mature tree because they want more parking for their Airbnb people, and that's not cool, because we're excluding that
But
property.
they would be doing development because then they'd be added parking to their commercial development.
Well, they don't need a permit, I
they
don't
don't
think,
need a
to do
permit for that.
parking. This gets, I guess, my biggest objection to this is it defines an us and a them. It creates two different types of people within the city, a commercial owner or a private single-family owner. We are demonizing developers when most of us live in a house that was developed by a developer, or an apartment or a condo, a house. And most of these mature trees that we're fighting to save so much were planted by that developer or someone in the past, right? We didn't move into a rainforest or and start chopping down trees to create, Encinitas. So everything that we are striving to prevent has been done because someone has developed the property. And I feel a little disingenuous to turn around and say, any developer that wants to build affordable housing in our community or subdivide and create, more market rate housing or workforce housing, any type of housing, that we need all of it, they were going to turn around and penalize them with a requirement that we don't even want to put on ourselves. I agree to a large extent with Susan's point of view, but I'm not sure I'm ready, if that puts me on a fence, I'm not sure I'm ready to jump into, let's apply it to all houses. I'm thinking, why do we need
Well,
the
I do
ordinance in
have
the
a
first
question
place?
about it for council. I'm wondering what our council would say, is it wrong legally to penalize these developers that are supposedly putting in affordable housing and not apply that equally to everybody else?
Well, I think it is.
wrong?
I think it is, and I think to Linda's point earlier. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking city council, but yes, the attorney. Yeah.
These are some very interesting issues that you're bringing up. I think the way to approach this is to continue to have your input on this, that we take that input and then present it to the city council for their consideration.
And I think ultimately
you.
that's what we can do, is have our recommendations. But to Linda's point earlier, if all sorts of discussions have been floated out there about it not being onerous enough to the developer, it's like it is truly just trying to prevent a developer from doing something. We can find other value to having trees and all of that, but ultimately the purpose isn't clear. And I feel like it's a kind of a thinly veiled ordinance that basically says, let's make it really, really difficult for somebody else to come build something.
I disagree. It's we're going to make it hard to knock down a mature tree. And we're not talking about not building. We're just trying to make sure that you consider taking down a tree in an urban environment. And if there's a large Torrey pine in the middle of your project, you can still build there. It's just going to cost you a little bit more money. It's still a developable site. You can still, as the Greek church did, knock down the tree and build their project.
But don't they already have a requirement to plant?
I think when we look at the purpose, that's the crux of this, really, isn't it? The purpose. Why? Why do we want this ordinance? Because we want to protect mature trees.
But I don't think we're being
We don't want
honest in our
people to cut
purpose.
them down unless they really need to.
Right,
Because
and
it's
I-
You
disease.
change the purpose.
I
That
think
was
if-
also
yeah.
suggested.
But I think if a way we could serve the purpose more is that anybody who's going to do development, which would include single-family residences, is subject to the ordinance.
I agree, and that plays on Bob's point earlier about maybe a commercial property as a commercial venture, economic venture. But so many people have their net worth, and I mean, your home is not a benign, asset that you just happen to live in it, right? Everybody is trying to improve their property and maximize their value, and so I feel like it's a little problematic.
Right, and don't we want people who are building the ADU or adding onto their house to be able to design their addition, their ADU in a way that also protects mature trees, right?
Yes, but now you're saying, okay, the housing is more important than the tree, and that's a big, broader.
I'm not saying
just-
the housing's more important
No,
than the
no, but-
tree. I'm saying if the purpose is to protect more mature trees, why are we going to ignore all mature trees on single-family residence properties who want to do development on their property?
Look, if you're asking me in the big picture, where would I go? I would say, yeah, all for one, one for all. And that would protect the most amount of trees. If the idea is to protect our urban canopy and sequester carbon and maximize the impacts on our climate action plan, then yeah, everybody, it's really unfair, honestly, to put it on a portion of the population. And I bet if I went around to a shopping center, given the acreage, I could probably count the total number of trees on one hand that are still alive in their little planter box after 3 years. So, you're right, Chair, that we are separating the two. I think we would get maximum impact by having single-family residences included. I mean, if that's the intent, is to protect the urban tree forest and protect mature trees outside of a hazardous tree or outside of a tree that, I don't know how much we actually accomplish by just narrowing it to the commercial side and eliminating, let's just say for grins, 65% of the surface area of Encinitas is not going to be applied.
Or more.
Or more. I just
much more.
came up with a random number.
I do think, to keep in mind that the urban forest that we're looking to protect has all been planted by people that did not have a mature tree ordinance in place. I mean, there are landscape requirements for new development, and those trees will become mature or, big and grow. And the reason that we even have trees here is because someone has planted them, and it didn't take an ordinance to make them do it.
Agreed. I mean, the pictures of Encinitas not too long ago, it's pretty stark. I mean,
Right.
It's
Right.
They're not a lot of native trees.
So I guess my
Except
point
in the
being.
high fire zones.
Except in the high fire zone. I have an eucalyptus I'll give you.
Yeah. Okay.
So what do we, I mean, there's been so much work, years of work, and this is not the first time this has come up, I'm sure, in deliberations by UFAC and others. So how do we recommend changing the language as suggested by Linda on the intent and purpose? And then that makes the ordinance much more consistent.
Let me.
And yet, we still have the issue of some
Yeah.
versus all.
Right.
Sorry.
I made a short list as you guys were speaking earlier, and maybe I can go through that list. Maybe there's some things that we can scratch off and that the staff has heard our discussion and they can relay that or, know that that was part of the discussion before we get into, I think we touched on the big issue already, right? But just briefly, there was some discussion about how to determine whether a tree was, when the time period for 3 years begins. And I think that would be important in the ordinance, if you're going to have that language, that there be some clear way of knowing, was it from certificate of occupancy or was it from a day of planting and this and that. There was some talk about, we're talking about single family, the fee level. Maybe we'll have to come back to this about whether 3 times or 5 times what the right amount is.
Yep.
Because I don't think I'm quite there yet with that discussion. The director override was a concern. And briefly saying, I don't know, I think, was that you, Chris? Or I don't know, Bob, sorry. It seems fairly standard language to me, but I don't know if you want to try to wordcraft that or just express that that's of a concern that
It's an expression of
one
concern.
person can just come in and wipe it out, or override it. But there was some discussion about emergency action, and I think that was already addressed with some language about within 30 days applying for a permit?
Right, 30 days out. Like, if it's a true emergency, within 30 days, they'd have to submit the documentation.
Okay.
I think that's what we talked about.
This is related to the 3-year thing, but I guess there was some problem or some concern about how the notification begins. If you buy a property, are you getting a disclaimer, a disclosure from your real estate agent that, hey, the tree in your backyard will have to be certified in 3 years and you'll pay for that? Like, that seems, maybe something that could be worked out.
I picture the whole family standing around the tree. Like, we got to keep this tree alive for 3 years.
That's right, for 3 years, and then we
Put a
can kill
swing
it.
up near it.
No,
No tire
but-
swings.
Yes.
but there's a bunch of rules in the city that aren't, disclosed, I guess. You're a citizen of the city, and, you have to pay.
Let me ask you this, just more broadly.
I think it's a great idea because the
than that.
person's buying it, but I don't know how you can hand a disclosure to someone saying, here are the 55 things you have to do in the city of Encinitas, just to make sure you're a resident, and the tree is one of them. I don't know how we can enforce that.
I think maybe this was one of my comments in February, but is this ordinance creating a big burden that the city arborist has to be calculating tree values and the city planning department has to be recording when a tree was planted and then tracking 3 years later? It just seems like there's a lot in this ordinance that requires a
And
pretty
rules
heavy
can
lift.
change over time too, so maybe, if you put something into paperwork, like a deed, that you say verify requirements for trees with the city, something just very simple.
Yeah.
Right, it also required those city staff, if ownership of the property changes more than once, then they're going to tax records to find the new owner, or,
Yeah.
so there's additional cost associated
but
with
there's
it.
practically speaking, it's any different than you buy into an association and you have association fees that are ongoing. Those are deed restricted, and there's language in your title report that says you've got an HOA that you owe $1,000 a month. So I don't think it's that far off, but clearly there are other examples of things that are passed along with the property. That's all.
Sure. The last thing on my list here was a 4-inch diameter for the Encinitas oak or the shrub oak or whatever we call it. But I don't know, 4 inches seems like an awfully small tree to me. But we're going to protect it because it's our namesake.
Oh, I think it's only 4 inches because it only grows in a certain place, and the climate only allows, it's like what they call crumholz up in the tundra. It can only grow so big because that's only what it can grow. So that's the size of the plant. Well, I'll ask the boss, so.
Agora Hills protects down to 2-inch for that oak tree.
Yeah,
So,
maturity is
4
just
seems okay to me.
Yeah, maturity is just defined for different species of trees at different heights. So
Yeah. How long did it take to get to a mature like from a sapling? I'm calling it an Encinitas oak. Is that the right term for it, or is it the shrub oak, or?
it's the Quercus dumosa is the technical term. There's a bunch of.
Okay. I'm not going to use the Latin.
Encinitas oak is fine. Yeah. So
It's Greek to me.
it depends. I was talking to someone about this today a little bit. It could take upwards, 60 years to get to a size that big for that specific tree, but it's very location dependent. It's just dependent on a lot of things, but that is why the minimum is so low on that, because it's a slow, oaks are traditionally slow growing trees. They take a long time to get to maturity. So that's why I think UFAC wanted to make that designation a little bit smaller. So it takes a little bit longer to get there. The size designation for native species is always just a little bit different because.
Okay. I think that's on the list because I put it there. I don't know if there's any other
I'm not going to go
concerns
against the
about that.
arborist, and it's a 60-year-old 4-inch tree. Well, then, that's a mature tree.
Okay. Some of the bigger items then, I think, is initially the Planning Commission recommended removing the 3-year arbor certification of the tree. We've talked around that issue about the problematic nature of that, but it did not get included in this ordinance. Is there any change of position by the Planning Commission on that item?
Don't you think if it's not in there, that how will we assess if the tree
It is
survived or
in there,
not?
right? The 3 years is in there.
We asked in
Right.
February that they remove it, and the staff has said they've looked at it, they're not going to remove it. Are we good with that, or do we want to, if we send this recommendation forward, in February, we would have recommended removing it?
I'm good with it staying in.
Yeah?
I think it's very, very good.
Okay, so I see some sort of general consensus around that. Okay. The UFAC, I think, made some really interesting points, and maybe I'll try to summarize them. Okay, we've talked around whether single family should be exempted or not. I'll skip that for now. The idea of paying the in lieu fee instead of trying to find tree replacements. And so it was an interesting point that trying to find replacement sites puts the burden on the city versus on the homeowner, or the developer. Let's be clear, it's not the homeowner. Is there any? Does that resonate with anybody here?
I'm not that clear on it because wouldn't the city replace the tree either way? And so they'd still have to find a
No,
site, whether they got,
So maybe just to look to staff, the city is not going to be the one planting these trees. The developer will have to find or plant these trees. If they're doing replacement trees, they need to come to you and say, do you have any city parks that need new trees? And that's where you would have to step in and say, well, how about Oakdale or whatever?
Yeah, that's correct. So section L2 talks about applicants shall consult with the city public works, parks and rec departments regarding viable planting locations in public locations.
Who does the actual work, though? Does the city staff do the actual work, and are they reimbursed by the
I can speak to
developer?
that. I think we went over this with Rob. The city will not allow a private entity to plant in the public right of way for a new city maintained tree, because we don't know the quality, we don't know the work that's done. And it would probably cost more to monitor that. So that would be planted by the city if it was going in a park or the right of way by our contractor.
So there is a certain burden to the city to plant those trees, right?
Yep, and that's maybe why the fee should go up. Maybe that's one reason why the fee should go up a little bit, to cover that cost.
Two different fees, though, right? So not to cross, one was a penalty for removing, is the treble fees would apply to
The in lieu?
Yeah,
the in lieu? They're
Well,
not the
Yes,
same, right?
I can clarify that. So the in lieu fee, so that's section M1, that is, owner shall pay a fee equal to the appraised value of the tree, including the cost of replacing the tree and any appraisal costs incurred by the city. So there's no treble fees when we're talking about just the in lieu fee. The treble fees come into play in enforcement. So if you violated the ordinance, you've removed trees without obtaining a permit, that's when the treble fees come into effect.
Okay, thank
all
you.
right, so it's the in lieu fee that need to properly be, one of the comments was, how about an example in the ordinance? Was that you who said, or someone said, let's put an example in the ordinance for an in lieu fee so that someone understands the cost rather than guess. So the in lieu fee would be, as it is in M1 that he just read, well, you're going to have to pay a
$3,000 times
$3,000
3.
for this, whatever the fee is. And it's A plus B, and C is $3,000 for the city to make sure that they plant the tree, because that's the cost of us using a backhoe to plant it on city property.
I do think an example would be helpful, or at a minimum, a reference to how the value would be determined. By
Takes the guesswork out, and people then can quantify and make a business decision on the dollar amount that they're willing to put at risk or not. So it could be, an example could be the price of the tree and the fee, and the fee is basically to cover the city's cost to dig the hole at the park.
Yeah. The third item, and Brad, excuse me if I get it wrong, but there were trees that could be in a high fire hazard severity zone, and I think you used the Encinitas oak again. as
Right,
an
the
example,
preserve.
which you say is not a fire hazard, but would
But
be.
it's in the zone.
But it's in that zone.
So it
and
can be cut
could
down.
be exempted from this ordinance.
Right, so the developer could knock it down at the preserve and put a house on top of where, you know, if it were a Torrey pine, it'd be hard to miss, but if it's an Encinitas oak at 4 inches high, because the soils and the water, that's all it's going to be at 60 years old. It's exempt because it's in a high fire zone, and we're going to have projects like the preserve and then the sanctuary, also in Levenheim, that are in these areas that are being approved. Preserve hasn't come yet.
So maybe the
But it's
exemption
exempt.
is not blanketly anything in the high fire hazard severity zone, but anything deemed necessary to come out by the fire department, right? You could go plead your case to the fire department to say, this tree is not a fire hazard.
I'd be all over an opportunity to try to preserve, I mean, again, because the native habitat issue then goes to the birds, and it goes to the hawks, and it goes to the toads, and, you know, that's the whole point of having the tree as a life force that really, so yeah, I think that would be great if there'd be
I'd support
some
that.
way to have a second step. That's a great idea, Steve.
Rather than blanket it excluding high fire.
Yeah, I mean, it's taking down a high fire eucalyptus issue, or a weed as defined by the code. That'd be great, because I'm sure Josh would love to have us take all the weeds down, you know, because that makes everything more safe. But certain plants that really don't burn, but you're just basically bulldozing them just because you can.
Let me ask you a question. Do you see any difference between a tree that is out in a native landscape, you know, a canyon or something undeveloped, versus a tree that is within a, for lack of a better word, urbanized area, right? Someone taking a large single-family lot and dividing it and you know, doing, in one case, all the trees have been planted, obviously, within a disturbed area, and the other case, you know, it's out at the periphery of the city or in the, you know, a canyon, and it's this native habitat. Is there a distinction between those two?
No, I don't think so. I think if it's I'll
I
keep
think
coming.
we'd have to just look at them all the same if they're within city property line, you know, the
Yeah,
boundary.
Right, I think if they meet the definition of a mature tree, then it doesn't matter if it was planted or it was naturally occurring in one of these other areas.
Don't forget, you know, the tree, a fallen tear, a bird could have pooped one out, and next thing you know, 20 years later, there's a beautiful tree, and that's kind of part of the process. And that tree then becomes that beacon for the same animal, whether the animal is in the canyon or in Cardiff. I mean, to me, I think it's the same tree, and I treat it the same way. And I guess, to your point, kind of everything here at some point was planted, you know, either by a bird or a person. It's still there, and I think we have to deal with it. And I think that's what we're trying to preserve, is what is here. Some things probably can come out, and I think there's identified on the weed classification. But yeah, I think to answer your question, a long answer is yes. I treat them the same.
Is there an unintended
And
consequence?
it all adds our health benefit.
I'm not debating. I mean, we all agree that a mature tree, the tree canopy, is a great, natural, healthy, environmentally friendly thing. I'm hung up, I think, on the private rights versus. I'm hung up on the commercial versus private, and whether, as a private individual, I have a right to manage the landscape that grows on my property. And that's where my thing is. I wonder if there's an unintended consequence here. If this ordinance goes into effect, does everybody with a mature tree say, I'm going to go mow this down?
I don't think the rest of us feel the same way as you on that
No, you
point.
might not. But is there an unintended consequence that people will go out and start removing their trees in the 60 days it's going to take, or in 6 months it's going to take for this ordinance to go into effect? Would they say, I'd rather not be beholden to the whims of the city on this thing? I'd rather just get rid of the tree now?
No, I don't see that happening. And are you talking about single-family residences now? But they are, right, they're exempt, and the way it is written right now, but if they're not exempt, it would, I mean, my proposal would be that if they're going to do development on their property, then they're subject to it. But I don't think that people that have private property at home are going to just go and take down a mature tree because they think that in the next couple of years they might be adding on an ADU, and they want to take care of it now, right? Otherwise, why wouldn't they have taken out that tree earlier? They don't
Well,
like
this
that
might
tree.
this might be the
I
impetus
don't-
to
I
go
think that
take
the-
action.
I think that the risk is pretty low of that.
Okay.
I think that we've been kicking the ordinance around since 2021, and if somebody was worried, they probably already took out their tree. I don't think it's passing it will be any big fire alarm for anyone.
Okay. I feel like we're kind of settling in on some consensus around things. I think I'm an outlier in the general feeling up here, not having taken any votes. But I do think we should look to find an end to the discussion and make our recommendation. Again, we're not the ones approving or passing this ordinance anyway. So I think we want to move it on to the city council, let them make their decisions. I think whatever happens tonight, I think, opposed to the ordinance and the fact that I find that it's an impingement on private property rights, and I find it a kind of a thinly veiled target towards development, where I see most of us have benefited from development in this city because that's what we live in. So I do agree that the purpose of this document could be straight. I mean, let's call a spade what a spade. Let's call this what it is, and say, if that is we're all fine saying that openly and boldly that this is to really stick it to the developers. Then let's put it in the purpose right up front and make that part of it.
I don't see it that way at all.
Yeah.
I'm completely opposite. I think it speaks for the trees. Trees can't talk for themselves, but they provide us with so many health benefits, and also the water, they suck up all of that extra water. If we let people just take out those mature trees, the roots will die, and they will not be sucking up that water. So you're increasing your flooding and the stormwater problem. And so I think when you may be, because you're still working in industry and business, and I'm not, but I see it totally as an environmental health benefit to have lower emissions, carbon sequestration, which is much more with a mature tree. There have been many scientific studies that show that.
I don't disagree.
So I don't see it as sticking it to developers, not at all.
Well, that's a lot of the.
I see it as, I see the whole purpose is to preserve and protect mature trees.
Yeah.
You're not saying you can't take out your tree. You can still take out your tree. You need to go down, get a permit to do it. Big deal. So you want to take out your tree? You can. We're not stopping you. And I think that it should be applied universally, not just, okay, we're going to stick it to developers.
Okay.
I don't think that's a good attitude at all. I think
It seems like most people don't want the
everybody.
ordinance. When the public outreach came in, most private property owners didn't want it, and most commercial property owners didn't want it.
Right, so if we're going to have one, I think it needs to be equally applied to all.
Well, also,
this-
commercial property
right.
owners didn't want it, right?
That's what I'm saying. So this is where I'm kind of coming down on that. I think that we should include single-family residences that are going to be doing development, and I don't think we should include removal not related to development.
Removal not related, okay.
Because that's really another way of just kind of sticking it to commercial property owners
Yeah, sure.
who aren't doing anything, they aren't developing. And also, I think that we should not have the high fire completely exempt.
Okay. This is a recommendation to go to do we need a motion outlining each of these items, or does someone review the transcript and say, here's the kind of general what the conversation is about?
I think for clarification, if you could reiterate what your specific recommendations are, so you can make a single motion and just say, the Planning Commission recommends approval with the following changes. or however you'd like to articulate that, just to make it straightforward for the record what the formal recommendation is.
I would like to move that we approve this with the addition of single-family as not exempt, and that we ask council to consider purpose and consider if they want to expand on that definition of the purpose.
I'd support that. I'd like to, offer just a friendly amendment to that we increase that treble fee up to the 3 to 5 times.
3 or 5 or 4.
3 to 5.
It's 3 now.
Okay, I see what you're saying. The council can decide what
Increase it
they
to
think is
5.
enough.
Increase.
Okay.
I'd like to also add that we define, it's kind of early to do a motion, but if we've got a motion on the table, either we vote for the motion or we not vote for the motion. We want to add.
I think the motion is going to be most successful if everybody offers their friendly amendment on a case-by-case basis.
Then-
If Susan has made the motion and Brent has asked for a friendly amendment, if Susan doesn't think that that's appropriate, we can try to piece it out.
Yes, I agree with Brent.
Okay, so right now, the motion can still stand as it is with including single-family homes, revising the purpose to try to find clarity in the purpose, and increasing the fee from 3 to 5.
I'd like to add a friendly amendment that we define the day of planting, or so if the developer is selling properties, maybe it's then when they have the ability to sell the property that the tree has to be in, and that's the clock. You think you brought in,
When
is
does
it
the
the day of
3-year
planting?
clock begin?
Yeah, when the developer is granted a C of O, that allows them to transact, correct? They can sell their property. So I think at that point, rather than, hey, lot number 2 was done on Tuesday and they put the tree in, that's going to be too hard to track each of those trees. So it's upon C of O would be my, whatever that.
Susan, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Any other amendments to the motion?
Chairman Dalton, may I ask one clarifying, over here, Patty? May I ask
We
one
all looked over
clarifying?
that way.
I'm sorry, what?
When the commission is asking us to revise the purpose, are you specifically referring to section 23.27020, mature tree preservation ordinance?
2327010, intent and purpose.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'd like to clarify. So that is for the overarching section. It will include, if adopted, the native plant ordinance, so it's hierarchy.
Okay.
The actual purpose and intent for the mature tree ordinance is defined and stated. It would be in the 2327020.
Yes.
Mature tree preservation A, intent and purpose.
Okay,
So I just wanted to make that clarification.
that's fine. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
All
and
right.
I have 2 friendly amendments. One is to remove the high fire areas from being exempt, and I think that there's another way. I don't want it to be completely exempt. I don't want developers to be able to go in and completely remove all mature trees, even if they happen to be in the high fire. So I'd ask to remove high fire. I'd also ask to remove K, removal not related to development.
I'm also wondering if we could somehow include something regarding non-high fire risk mature trees in high fire zones.
Meaning like take the bad trees out in the high fire zone, right? And typically the native trees are not going to be, well, for discussion anyway, the Encinitas oak is not going to, I'll ask the question of the arborist. I'm making the assumption that a high fire zone tree that falls under the weed category is going to burn and be problem to the homeowner based on the insurance company and the cost to maintain the house. I don't want to have to be in conflict, but the Quercus aquifolia won't have the same burn rate, so to speak. So you can't come in and take out a Quercus aquifolia in a high fire zone just because it's in a high fire zone. But if it's too close to your house, you have to make some concessions because you can't get your homeowner's insurance. So how do we deal with, I love the amendment supported by Commissioner Ryan, but I also want to make sure that I live in one of those zones, and I think my Quercus aquifolia is far enough away, but if my insurance company says it isn't, and we pass the friendly amendment, how do I reconcile that? I'd love to take my eucalyptus tree out because I think that's a torch, but I want to keep my oak. What do you suggest?
Would that qualify as an emergency situation then? No?
More of a property rights and allowing an individual property owner to remove something, try to get insurance, right? All the things that were brought up at public comment as well.
You could be required, maybe, I mean, would you be required to just replace it with another tree?
I think most people in high fire areas would probably be okay with that. I'm saying, I'll speak for myself, I get it, but if that eucalyptus tree is up against the house, I'm gonna have to remove it.
As the amendment is, it would remove the high fire hazard zone from a blanket exemption of all of this.
Right.
But that all properties within the high fire hazard zone would still be subject to the fire marshals or fire departments review of their landscape plan.
Okay.
And they require a 50-foot buffer and a 100-foot buffer
Right.
of different.
Okay, so there's
planting.
going back to
So
comment about hierarchy.
Yeah, so the intent is not to override the fire department's requirements,
Okay.
but to provide that it's not a blanket exemption all the time. That you could go back and say, I really like this 4-inch tree that I have.
Right.
I
Love
want
it.
to keep it, and it's not a fire hazard.
Right. Okay. Then I'm just trying to.
I think that would be one of those things where the director might make a determination. You'd have to go and talk to the director and the city arborist, because that's the reason why I think they include that option of having them look at the situation.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
perhaps staff could discuss the tree risk rating portion that's right above the emergency as to this, the eucalyptus as you're talking about, or some other tree.
Right.
That you think, as a property owner, is risky, but is not, as staff was saying, not an emergency. But right above that is the tree risk rating. I don't know if that plays in and could be used to deal with that. We've already considered that and don't need to include that as part of a further amendment.
Oh, that's a great comment. How does the?
Because it says, as it stated, tree risk rating, the condition of a mature tree poses a high or extreme risk rating as determined by ISA certified arborist who's a tree risk assessment qualified using the ISA basic tree rating assessment form.
I feel like that's, though, different. So, right, the arborist is going to evaluate the health of the tree. Are the limbs going to fall on your head? Is it going to uproot your foundation? But
Yeah.
they won't.
This isn't related to fire.
They won't opine on the fire.
The risk
safety.
is more of like a liability issue, or like, there's an impending tree that's going to fall over an intersection or something like that.
Okay, so,
That is where
but
the
that would
risk
be the
comes in.
place to insert this concern about that particular kind of tree in that situation, given that topography, as a reasonable way to mitigate the fire risk.
I would not include fire as in the tree risk rating. It's mostly about liability. I would not include that in there. It's not a
Where would you put
appropriate
it?
way in the arboriculture world to assess fire rating.
Well, that's from an arborist perspective. From a fire safety perspective, there might be a different perspective, right?
It's a very convoluted world of like what CAL FIRE thinks is fire safe, what the insurance thinks is fire safe. It's a little bit too complex to like dice it down to one specific tree risk form that could give you the answer that you're looking for.
I'm not asking to put it on that form, but where do we put it in the ordinance to address this concern that's being articulated?
I would say that, like any other, like say you open it up to all homes in fire danger, and your insurance company comes to you and they say, hey, you need to take down this cypress tree. It's too close to your house. It's on a fire list. We want it removed. You would do the same process that you would do if it was a city tree. You would go, you would get your permit for that. So you would pay, and then the ISA certified arborist or, whoever that representative is, the city arborist would come he would look at your permit. We have to do this sometimes for commercial buildings where the commercial building's like, okay, my insurance is saying that I need to do action on this tree. They submit a permit, I come out and I look at it, and we assess it on a one-by-one basis.
So if I may, I appreciate this discussion a lot, but I think to succinctly summarize what the recommendation was, because we can separately discuss at a staff level where the appropriate placement would be at a later time. But I believe what you are recommending is to remove the high fire hazard severity zone exemption and consider an alternative to allow for replacement provisions with appropriate tree species at the discretion of the fire department or similar language.
Okay. So I have 6 amendments, and Brent, you were beginning, I think, I don't know if it was a 7th amendment or a discussion of the 6th, the high fire. The 6th one I have on my list is removing section K.
No, what's been stated would encompass what I was considering.
All right. With that, that's a motion by Susan.
And to clarify, it's removal of all of section K?
Right, because Section K only deals with, in its entirety, deals with development, removal not related to development. And the rest of the document deals with removal related to development.
Okay, so that's eliminating the ability of a property owner to petition to get rid of a mature tree that is dead, a mature tree that has the risk rating, in an emergency and is damaging to utilities and infrastructure.
Is it more the language in the opening paragraph that I think we need to adjust? Because I do think we need to keep
Chris,
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
If as amended or motioned, we're going to include single-family property, aren't we also then including commercial properties? In which case, you were worried, I believe, that we were singling out commercial property owners, but we're really saying, no, we're all in this same boat together. Single-family, development, and commercial properties.
Right, but so here's my concern, is that K only talks about removal not related to development for commercial properties, but single-family residences would still be able to remove not related to development. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
So
does it specifically say commercial properties in here?
No.
No, but I think it goes back, I think you go back up to
Because they
what's
weren't exempted.
exempt.
Yeah, but we're
Correct.
not exempting
I
single
want
families.
to clarify something for everyone.
Okay.
We already have in our cap that if you remove a tree, you have to replace it on a 1-to-1 ratio. So private and non-private, everything is already in our cap. This ordinance is for mature trees because they are so special. They require additional protection.
Okay, good. I think we have
I
a
see what you're
motion.
saying. So
Okay,
that's fine.
So on item K, are we going to remove that?
Yep.
Okay, so we are striking that amendment. We're going to leave K, section K untouched. Okay? With that, can I get a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. I will call the vote. Okay, that looks like it passes 4-1.
Passes 4-1.
Yes. All right. With that, we're almost done. Hold on. Okay, with that, there are no reports because, again, we're special hearing just for this item. So with that, I will adjourn this meeting until our next regular Planning Commission hearing on December 18th. And with that, we're done.
Thank you guys for coming.
than 135 degrees. Fire sprinklers require a constant heat source in order to activate.